My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and for nearly 5 decades, I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet heart of Hazelbrook Orchards, a small, organic apple farm nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. My hands, though now stiff with arthritis, still remember every step of turning dough into sourdough loaves and pruning trees at dawn with Richard, my husband. 3 weeks ago, I buried him. Richard and I had been married since 1981. We built everything together, this orchard, this home, this family. And yet, the morning after his funeral, I realized that I might not have built what I thought I had. Or maybe it just wasn't enough to hold on to my children. Richard died of pancreatic cancer. 14 months of watching a man of the earth waste away, his strength stolen bit by bit. He didn't want the kids to know. Let them live their lives a little longer without this shadow, he had whispered to me one night, his voice thick with morphine. And because I loved him, I agreed. But in truth, I already knew. Our children Darren and Samantha had grown distant long before the diagnosis. Darren, the eldest, had carved out a fast-paced career in Boston's financial world and hadn't been home for more than a handful of weekends in over a decade. Samantha, on the other hand, floated from one failed wellness business to another, always funded by Richard's savings and always in need of just one more loan. I had hoped that grief would bring them back to the core of who we were, that they would remember the orchard, the family dinners, the love that built this house. But when they arrived for the funeral, I didn't see children mourning their father. I saw professionals calculating an estate. The night after the funeral, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the worn wood of our dining table. I told them we could sort through Richard's things together the next day. It was a small gesture, a mother's way of making space for memory. But they had other plans. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the lace curtains Richard and I had picked out together 30 years ago. I made coffee, the simple kind Richard liked, not the imported blend Darren had brought from Boston, and waited at the kitchen table. They came downstairs, dressed sharply. Darren in a blazer he didn't bother to remove, Samantha in a silk blouse and perfectly curled hair. They looked like they were heading to a business meeting, not sitting down to remember their father. "Mom," Darren began, placing his coffee mug down with that same practiced precision I'd seen in his father. "We've been talking." Samantha glanced at him, then at me. "We think it's time to start settling things. The estate, the business, the house." I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. Settling. "It's practical," Darren said. "You can't run the orchard alone. And the house, it's big, Mom. Too much for someone your age." My age? The words sat heavy in the room. I had pruned those trees beside Richard through blizzards and heat waves. I had handled payroll when we couldn't afford an assistant, baked pies for fundraisers, driven tractors, delivered crates to food banks. "We want you to be comfortable," Samantha added, her voice smooth like a sales pitch. "There's a wonderful retirement community 2 hours south. Sunnyvale Estates. Activities, friends your age." I stood to clear the breakfast plates, needing motion to hide my shaking hands. Then Darren pulled out a folder. "Dad spoke to me about this last year," he said, sliding a set of documents toward me. "He wanted Melissa and me to take over." I looked at the paper. It was printed on Darren's corporate letterhead. Richard's signature steady, too perfect, looked off. He hadn't written that clearly in months, not since the morphine. "This isn't from our family lawyer," I said. "He was lucid when he signed it," Darren insisted. "He wanted this," Samantha said quickly. "A fresh start. There's a developer interested. $7 million for the land. We'd be set. You'd be cared for." A developer. They wanted to sell the orchard. Level it. Replace a lifetime of harvests and sustainability and giving back with concrete and cul-de-sacs. "You're talking about selling your father's life's work," I said quietly. "Mom, be reasonable," Darren said. "The orchard can't last forever." I felt something rise in me, a slow-burning fury I hadn't touched since I once chased off a fox trying to get into the chicken coop. I looked at both of them, my children, and said with calm steadiness, "Show me the will." Darren hesitated, then pushed it forward again. I didn't touch it. "I'm going to bed," I said. "We'll talk tomorrow." But deep down I already knew. There would be no tomorrow conversation. They weren't grieving. They were executing a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the bed Richard and I had shared for decades, listening to the creaks in the farmhouse walls and the wind brushing against the apple trees outside. Every sound was familiar. It was the silence in my children's hearts that had become foreign. By morning, the smell of coffee wafted through the house. Not the warm, nostalgic kind, but sharp, bitter, imported. Darren's kind of coffee. I moved slowly, my joints aching more from betrayal than from age. When I came downstairs, they were already waiting, coats on, suitcase packed. The suitcase wasn't mine. "We packed some essentials for you," Samantha said brightly. "We thought we could drive you to Sunnyvale today. Just to look. You don't have to decide yet." "I'm not going to a retirement community," I said, pouring myself a cup. Darren checked his watch. "Mom, be reasonable. The paperwork is done. We close with the developers next week. You can't stay here." "I've lived here my entire adult life," I replied, voice calm. "This is my home." "It's all of ours," Darren said flatly. "Dad left the business to us. It's time you let go." I stared at him, and for the first time I truly saw him not as the boy who once followed Richard through the orchards asking about bees and frost, but as a stranger, a man who viewed me as a liability to be managed. "I need my medication," I said, stepping away, "and I'd like to grab some family photos." Samantha nodded, visibly relieved. "Take whatever personal items you want, we'll ship the rest." Upstairs I didn't cry. I gathered my pills, but also something they didn't know existed. Behind a panel in the medicine cabinet installed back in the 80s, when Richard worried about burglars, I retrieved my passport and birth certificate. In the closet, I reached behind his old flannel shirts and pulled out a small, fireproof box. It was heavy. It held something more powerful than sentiment, a deed. The original deed to 20 acres of land, purchased in my maiden name before marriage. Land with water rights. Land essential to any future development. When I returned downstairs, my purse was heavier, but my heart lighter. "Ready?" Darren asked. "Sure," I said, allowing Samantha to take my arm. I let them believe I was defeated. We drove past the fields just beginning to bloom. Past the elementary school where I volunteered. Past the library where I read to children. But instead of taking the highway toward Sunnyvale, Darren veered onto a remote county road. 20 minutes later, he pulled onto a gravel shoulder beside an empty field. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said, as casually as if he were announcing a stoplight. "The house and business are ours now." Samantha's smile faltered. "Darren, what?" "She'll contest the will, make scenes. This is cleaner. She has clothes, her meds. There's a gas station 5 miles up." He opened my door. And just like that, they left me standing on the side of a road with nothing. Or so they thought. The car disappeared down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and the smell of betrayal. I stood still, the wind tugging at my coat, clutching the small suitcase they had packed for me. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't broken. I was free. I began to walk not toward the gas station Darren had so generously mentioned, but toward town, toward my next move. My flats weren't made for gravel roads, and the early spring sun was already warming the back of my neck. But with every step, my purpose solidified. In my purse was everything I needed, my ID, my passport, my medication, and most importantly, the original deed to 20 acres of prime orchard land. Land that Darren and Samantha didn't know existed. Land I had purchased in my own name before Richard and I married. It was a precaution back then, just in case the business didn't survive. Richard had called it our just-in-case safety net. Now it was my lifeline. Those 20 acres weren't just any land. They held the only natural water source on the entire property. Without it, no irrigation. Without irrigation, no orchard. And no development. My children thought they had cornered me. But they didn't understand the soil beneath their feet. They didn't understand the weight of legacy. I did. After nearly 2 hours of walking, my feet were blistered and aching. But I reached the edge of Hazel Brook, and the familiar sight of Miller's Gas and Grocery. It was small, old-fashioned, and unchanged. A place where people still called each other by name and paid in cash. I sat on the bench outside and watched the cars come and go. I didn't look like much, just a tired old woman with a suitcase. But I had something far more powerful than they ever would, the truth. Ray Miller stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. He'd known me for over 30 years. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his brow furrowing. "You all right? You look a little pale?" "Just resting, Ray." "Been a long day," I said. He looked at the suitcase beside me, then back at me with concern. Real sorry about Richard. He was a good man. Yes, I nodded. Yes, he was. He hesitated, then asked gently, you need to use the phone. If it's not too much trouble. He led me inside, past the shelves of canned peaches and discount cereal, to a small office in the back. I dialed the number from memory, our family lawyer, Harold Jennings. Naomi? He answered on the first ring, surprised. I've been trying to reach you. I expected you at the will reading. My grip tightened on the receiver. What reading? There was a pause. Darren presented a will. I had concerns. It didn't match the file your husband and I updated last year. I need your help, I said, my voice clear. And your discretion. You have both. My office. 1 hour. I hung up and turned to Ray. Do you sell prepaid phones? He nodded. A few. Want one? Yes, and a bottle of water. He refused to take my money. On the house, Mrs. Whitmore. You need anything else, you just say the word. His kindness nearly undid me. But I didn't cry when I buried Richard, and I wouldn't cry now. I had work to do. And I wasn't finished yet. Harold Jennings' office was on the second floor of an old Victorian house on Main Street, just across from the town library. He'd been our lawyer for over 30 years. Harold was the kind of man who wore sweater vests without irony and still believed in handshakes. His secretary, Helen, gasped softly when she saw me. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Jennings is expecting you. Would you like a glass of water? Coffee? I'm fine, thank you, I said. Harold met me at the door to his office. He hadn't aged much since Richard's last visit, just a bit more stooped, perhaps, but his eyes were sharp, alert. Naomi, he said, not leading me to the desk, but instead to a pair of leather chairs beside the window. He sat across from me, his expression serious. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the funeral, the fake will, the boardroom-like discussion in our kitchen, the drive, the roadside abandonment, every detail. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, occasionally nodding, his face growing darker by the minute. When I finished, I reached into my purse and removed the fireproof box. From it, I pulled the original deed to the 20 acres, the land Richard and I had quietly set aside decades ago, in my name. Harold examined the document with a reverent sort of silence. This is gold, Naomi. This isn't just land. This is leverage. With the water rights and the zoning, the developer can't touch anything without this. I know. He leaned back, tapping the edge of the deed thoughtfully. The will Darren submitted, it's a forgery. I had my suspicions when I saw the signature. It was too clean, too smooth for a man under hospice care. I knew it wasn't Richard's. We'll challenge it, Harold said, but that takes time. Meanwhile, we use this. He held up the deed. You still have legal ownership of the most critical piece of the land. They can't move forward with the sale without your consent. I want my home back, I said quietly, and I want them to understand what they've done. Harold nodded. Then we'll make them understand. First, I'll draft a letter to the developer. They need to be made aware that the property is not what they were promised. Will they back out? If they're smart, they will. Developers don't like lawsuits, and they certainly don't like incomplete land rights. He stood suddenly purposeful. I also know a judge in district court. We can get a motion filed to freeze the sale until the matter is resolved. I looked out the window across the street where a young couple was walking hand in hand, unaware of the quiet storm beginning in this small office. I don't want revenge, Harold, I said, more to myself than to him. I want truth and peace. You'll have both, he promised, starting now. By noon the next day, Harold had filed an emergency injunction to freeze any transfer of ownership related to Hazelbrook Orchards. A courier delivered the legal notice to the development firm Darren and Samantha had been dealing with. Within hours, the deal was suspended. The developer, faced with unexpected legal complications and the revelation that a key portion of the land, containing the only natural water source, was owned separately and undisclosed, began to backpedal. Their lawyers reached out to Harold with urgent requests for clarification. I told them the truth, Harold said as we sat in his office reviewing documents. The land is incomplete. The water rights are not transferable. And more importantly, your children do not have the authority they claim. That evening, I received a text message from Samantha. It was the first time she'd reached out since they left me on the roadside. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Darren's freaking out. We didn't know about that other land. Can we just fix this? Fix this. I stared at the words on my prepaid phone. There was no apology. No recognition of what they'd done. Just panic now that the money was slipping through their fingers. I didn't reply. Later that night, Darren called Harold directly, demanding explanations, trying to reassert control. But Harold calmly informed him that all matters would now go through legal channels. They're realizing, Harold said, that they miscalculated. Badly. They thought I had nothing left, I replied. But I had everything they forgot to value. He looked at me with quiet pride. You're handling this with grace, Eleanor. A lot of people would have gone straight to scorched earth. I lived too long with kindness in my bones to become bitter now, I said. But I won't be silent, either. Outside, the town of Hazelbrook moved on with its day kids riding bikes, a dog barking in the distance, someone mowing their lawn. Life was still simple here, still honest. And I intended to keep it that way. The land would not be sold. Not now, not like this. The orchard Richard built, the legacy he left, was not a commodity, it was home. And I wasn't done protecting it. In the weeks that followed, I didn't return to the old farmhouse. I rented a modest apartment above the bakery on Hazelbrook's Main Street. It had a small balcony, just big enough for a rocking chair and a few potted herbs. The place smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread in the mornings. It wasn't the home Richard and I built, but it was mine. And that mattered. I started teaching again, quilting on Wednesday nights at the community center, just like before. I even began holding weekend workshops at the library, sharing what I knew about organic gardening and sustainable fruit farming. Teenagers came. Retirees came. Even young couples hoping to start their own farms. People listened. Not because I raised my voice, but because I spoke with history in my hands. The land we protected for decades, I donated the water rights in a trust to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, a local initiative that supports young farmers. They'd use it, not sell it. They'd care for the trees like Richard had. That was the future I wanted. Darren and Samantha kept their distance. I heard whispers that the developer pulled out entirely, that the fake will had been formally challenged and frozen, that their reputations had taken a hit in their respective cities. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need revenge to be allowed to be real. I chose peace, but not at the cost of truth. The orchard remained untouched, blooming, as always, in spring, and every time I passed by it on my walks, I smiled not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had reclaimed not just her land, but her voice. They had underestimated me, but I had finally remembered who I was. I often think back to that moment on the gravel road, standing alone with a suitcase I didn't pack, watching my own children drive away without a second glance. It should have broken me. But it didn't. Because in that silence I finally heard the truth I had ignored for years. Love is not loyalty without question. And being a mother does not mean tolerating betrayal just because you raised the ones who betrayed you. Darren and Samantha believed they could erase me. That because I was older, grieving, alone, I wouldn't fight back. That I had no choice but to hand over everything. But they forgot something. Before I was a wife, a mother, a widow, I was Eleanor Grace, a woman who built something with her hands, her heart, and her mind, and I had never needed to scream to be strong. What they saw as weakness, my silence, my trust, my love, was actually the very power that protected me. If you're listening to this and you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or treated like a footnote in your own life, I want you to hear this. Your strength isn't in how loud you fight. It's in how well you know what you stand for. And when you stand your ground, even quietly, it echoes louder than any betrayal. My orchard still stands. My name is still on the deed. And my life, it's mine again. So to anyone who's ever been told this is where you get off, I say walk if you must. But don't leave your worth behind. Walk with purpose. Walk with quiet power. And when you're ready, tell your story. It might just save someone else. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. And if you've ever been underestimated and found your strength, tell us. Your story matters.
The rehearsal dinner was meant to be a celebration, a final evening of laughter before vows were spoken. Nora Whitfield walked into the softly lit room holding a silver-wrapped package close to her chest. Inside was an album she had spent months creating, a record of her son Grant's life from toddler steps to law school graduation. Before she could present it, Madison Cole, Grant's fiancée, leaned in close. Her perfume was sharp, her smile practiced. She whispered words that cut deeper than any shout. "After tomorrow you are no longer family. Do us all a favor and stay away." The glasses clinked around them, music played on. Nora froze, the album heavy in her trembling hands. By sundown the next day there would be no vows. There would only be the truth. Nora Whitfield was never the kind of woman who asked for much. She worked behind a clinic desk in the mornings and at a small beauty salon in the evenings, stringing together 2 paychecks so her son would never feel the absence of a father. Her neighbors knew her as the woman who mowed her own lawn, patched her own roof, and still found the strength to cheer at every one of her son's soccer games. Grant was her pride, the boy who once carried a worn-out dinosaur toy everywhere and later carried heavy law textbooks into the night. Becoming the first in the family to finish law school was not just his victory but hers too. That was what made the whisper sting so deeply. Nora was not fighting for control. She was simply fighting to keep her place in the family she had built with every sacrifice she knew how to make. When Grant was 5, his father walked out of their small rented house in East Austin. Nora never let her son see how much it broke her. She simply woke up earlier, worked longer, and promised herself that Grant would never feel abandoned again. Every morning she packed his lunch before sunrise, then rushed to catch the bus to her first shift. After hours behind the reception desk, she hurried across town to stock shelves at a department store until late at night. Some evenings she was so tired she fell asleep with her shoes still on. But no matter how heavy her body felt, she always asked Grant about his day, always sat beside him as he finished his homework. Birthdays were marked with the same chocolate and raspberry cake, even when money was tight. It was their tradition, a reminder that no matter how difficult life became, love could still be sweet. When Grant first introduced Madison Cole, Nora tried to see her through her son's eyes. Madison was elegant, poised, and quick with conversation. She worked in advertising and carried herself as if every room belonged to her. Grant's expression lit up whenever she walked in, and that was enough for Nora to offer a welcoming smile. But small moments told a different story. When Nora shared a childhood memory of Grant falling asleep with crayons in his hand, Madison tilted her head and replied, "That's cute," before steering the conversation back to her latest client campaign. On Grant's 30th birthday, Nora brought the chocolate raspberry cake she had baked every year. Madison intercepted it at the door. "Grant is cutting carbs now," she said smoothly, sliding the cake to the side while caterers carried in trays of miniature hors d'oeuvres. None of these incidents were loud or obvious, but each one left Nora feeling a little smaller, as if her love for her son no longer had a place at his table. By the time the rehearsal dinner arrived, Nora had decided to try once more. She spent weeks arranging photographs, ticket stubs, and handwritten notes into a leather-bound album. Each page told a story: Grant's first soccer trophy, his college dorm move-in, the day he passed the bar exam. She wrapped it carefully in silver paper, hoping it would remind both of them what family really meant. When she entered the restaurant, Madison's white rehearsal dress caught the glow of the chandeliers. Nora stepped forward, holding out the gift. "I thought you and Grant could look through this together tonight," she said softly. Madison leaned close, her perfume heavy. Her smile never wavered as she whispered, "After tomorrow, you are no longer family. You've done your part. Grant is my husband now. Do us all a favor and stay home." Nora's breath caught. The album slipped slightly in her grasp, suddenly unbearably heavy. She nodded without speaking, then walked out into the cool night air. Later at home, she hung the deep teal dress she had bought for the wedding on the closet door. For the first time in her son's life, she decided she would not be there for him the next morning. The morning of the wedding broke clear and bright, the kind of sky brides dream about. Nora rose before her alarm, her body still conditioned by decades of early shifts. For a moment she moved as if preparing for the day, coffee poured, shoes laid out, but Madison's words returned like a sharp echo. "You are no longer family?" Her phone lit up again and again, cousins asking where she was, friends sending cheerful reminders. Then Grant's voice filled her voicemail, tinged with worry. "Mom, where are you? Everyone's waiting. Please call me back." At the church, guests found their seats while the organist rehearsed softly. In a side room, Grant's best man showed him photos taken just 2 weeks earlier. Madison and her boss, Carter Hale, unmistakably close, her bracelet glinting in the shot, the one Grant had given her on their anniversary. The truth spread quickly through whispers. When the noon bells rang, Grant did not walk forward to meet his bride. He stepped to the altar only to tell the congregation that the ceremony was cancelled. There would be no vows, no rings exchanged, only the weight of betrayal and the silence that followed. Within hours, Madison controlled the story. She posted a carefully staged photo of herself in her wedding gown, mascara artfully smudged, a caption written to pierce. Some mothers never learn to let go. Some sons never learn to stand on their own. Sympathy poured in online. Strangers called her brave. Acquaintances reposted her words with outrage on her behalf. In the echo chamber of social media, Madison was the abandoned victim and Nora became the villain who ruined her own son's happiness. At the grocery store, Nora noticed conversations fall silent when she walked past. At the pharmacy, a neighbor avoided her eyes. Even the parish priest, who had known her since Grant was a child, invited her to his office and gently urged her to let Grant live his life without interference. Nora sat in silence through the talk, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had spent decades swallowing comments, sacrificing for the sake of peace. But this time felt different. She was not jealous. She was not controlling. She had simply wanted a place in the family she helped create. And now, because of a whisper, she was being painted as something she was not. A week after the cancelled wedding, Nora opened her front door to find a courier holding an envelope stamped with the law firm's crest. Inside was a demand letter drafted on heavy paper, its language sharp and intimidating. The Cole family accused her of defamation, emotional damages, and something she had never even heard of before: interference with contractual relations. She sat at her kitchen table staring at the words, the legal jargon blurring together. Interference with contractual relations. It sounded more like business litigation than anything a mother could possibly commit. Nora called her friend Maya Chen, a paralegal at a downtown firm. After skimming the letter, Maya shook her head. "This is intimidation," she explained. "They're trying to scare you into silence." That last phrase? Just a fancy way of saying you cost them money by exposing their plan. The explanation didn't ease the knot in Nora's stomach. For years she had fought bills, long hours, and loneliness. But this was different. This was the weight of a wealthy family using the law like a weapon. And Nora wondered how much more she and Grant could endure. Nora refused to be crushed by threats printed on expensive letterhead. Instead, she opened the drawer where she kept years of careful files. She pulled out a folder stuffed with emails Grant had once forwarded to her. In them, Madison wrote about how his earning potential could lift not just their lifestyle but her parents as well. On Nora's phone were photos of text messages Grant had shown her. Madison dismissed his interest in pro bono work, pressing him to chase bigger clients instead. One message read plainly, "What good is a lawyer who does not maximize his income?" But the most troubling document lay in the prenup Madison had insisted on. Grant had asked his mother to look it over months earlier. Nora remembered how her chest tightened as she scanned the clauses. Entire sections aimed to funnel Grant's future salary and assets into joint accounts overseen by Madison and, indirectly, her family. Now, with the wedding called off, those papers became more than red flags. They were evidence that this engagement had been about more than love. Nora spread them across her table, a mosaic of truth, waiting for someone willing to see it. Grant knew they could not fight this battle alone. Through Maya, they were introduced to Jack Nolan, an investigative journalist known for exposing corporate fraud. He was compact in build, graying at the temples, with sharp eyes that missed little. Jack listened quietly as Nora and Grant laid out the emails, texts, and the prenup. He tapped his pen against his notebook, then finally said, "You've got something here? But for the public to believe it, I need independent confirmation." Over the next 2 weeks, Jack traced the Coles financial trail. He interviewed former employees who spoke of unpaid wages and sudden closures. He pulled public records showing failed business ventures and outstanding loans. A bank employee, speaking anonymously, confirmed that the Coles were months behind on substantial payments. While Jack gathered facts, Nora felt a fragile hope flicker. The story might finally shift from gossip about a broken wedding to what it truly was, a carefully hidden financial scheme. Still, she knew exposing powerful people could be dangerous. Truth had weight, and sometimes those it threatened struck back. 1 month after the ruined wedding, Jack's article appeared in the Sunday paper under the headline, "Behind a Broken Ceremony: The Financial House of Cards." It filled 2 full pages with timelines, interviews, and hard numbers. Online, the extended version included scanned documents and expert opinions from independent attorneys who called the prenup predatory. Yes, the piece mentioned the affair with Madison's boss, but only briefly. The heart of the report was money, failed ventures, unpaid debts, and the Coles' plan to use Grant's career as a lifeline. The community's reaction shifted almost overnight. Online comments no longer painted Madison as the abandoned bride. Instead, readers asked how far her family would go to secure their finances. At the grocery store, strangers now offered Nora sympathetic nods instead of silence. For the first time in weeks, she felt the narrative bend closer to the truth. But beneath that relief lurked unease. Families like the Coles rarely absorbed defeat quietly. Nora braced herself for what might come next. The backlash came on an ordinary Wednesday morning. Nora was pushing a cart down the supermarket aisle when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Miss Whitfield," the voice said formally. "This is Lieutenant Marcus Donovan with the Austin Police. We need you to appear at the station to answer questions." Nora stopped mid-step, oranges rolling from her bag onto the floor. "Questions about what?" she asked, her throat tightening. "There is a formal accusation of extortion and threats made against the Cole family," Donovan replied. "I recommend you bring legal counsel." By the time she reached her bungalow, an official notice was taped to her door. The paper stated that she had demanded money from the Coles in exchange for silence. It was a complete fabrication, yet terrifying in its detail. News of the charge leaked almost instantly. Local stations ran the headline, "Mother accused of extorting ex-fiancé's family." The salon where Nora worked part-time called politely, suggesting she take an indefinite leave. For the first time, Nora felt not just shamed but criminalized. If the system believed these lies, it would not just be her reputation at stake, it would be her freedom. Grant refused to let fear dictate their next step. He met with Avery Brooks, a seasoned defense attorney willing to take their case pro bono after reading Jack Nolan's reporting. Avery listened, then leaned back in his chair. "First rule," he said calmly, "we don't play defense forever. We push back." Jack published a follow-up exposing a conflict of interest. Lieutenant Donovan's son had been quietly employed by one of the few companies still tied to the Coles' shrinking business empire. The revelation raised questions about Donovan's neutrality and the integrity of the investigation. At the same time, Avery filed motions demanding that all alleged evidence be handed over for forensic analysis. Digital experts were ready to examine every supposed email, every supposed recording. For Nora, the legal jargon was overwhelming, but she clung to one truth: the more sunlight poured onto the case, the weaker the accusations appeared. The Coles had money and influence, but the ground beneath them was starting to crack. For the first time since Madison's whisper at the rehearsal dinner, Nora felt the balance shift, not in rumor or sympathy, but in the cold language of proof. Just when the pressure on the Coles reached its peak, a proposal arrived through their attorneys. If Nora and Grant agreed to sign a public retraction of Jack's article and accept a lifetime non-disclosure agreement, all criminal accusations would disappear. No trial, no more headlines, just silence. The offer was tempting on the surface. Nora could have her peace back. Grant could focus on his work without the shadow of courtrooms and cameras. But the cost was heavy, admitting to a lie and allowing the Coles to rewrite history. Grant placed the papers on the kitchen table and waited. Nora looked at her son, at the man she had raised through exhaustion and sacrifice. Her voice did not waver. "No, I will not erase the truth to protect their reputation." Grant nodded slowly, pride flickering in his tired eyes. "Then we fight," he said. "Whatever it takes, we fight." Weeks later, the silence from the Coles spoke louder than any headline. The district attorney's office announced that the case against Nora was being closed for lack of credible evidence. Lieutenant Donovan was reassigned after questions about his conflict of interest grew too sharp to ignore. Within days, neighbors reported moving trucks outside the Coles home. By the following weekend, the family had slipped out of Austin entirely. No public statements, no tearful posts, just absence. For Nora and Grant, there was no celebration, only relief. The smear campaign was over, the threat of prison gone. Still, the scars remained. Nora knew that while the Coles had left, the memories of what they tried to do would linger. Yet in the quiet of her bungalow, she also recognized something new: the strength to face them and the courage to keep standing. When the dust finally settled, life did not snap back to normal. Healing came slowly, in uneven steps. Grant returned to his law firm with clearer boundaries than before. He threw himself into cases that mattered, especially those involving clients who had been taken advantage of financially. At first it looked like distraction, but over time Nora saw it for what it was: purpose. Nora, meanwhile, began rediscovering the pieces of herself she had set aside. One evening she pulled out a box of watercolors left untouched since her 20s. What started as small sketches grew into canvases lined against the walls of her spare bedroom. Colors told stories her words could not. At Maya's encouragement, Nora attended a community support group for women who had endured betrayal and upheaval. Listening at first, then speaking, she discovered her voice carried weight. When she told the group, "Strength is not silence, it is standards," heads nodded in agreement. Mother and son, once nearly torn apart by a whisper, now shared a home filled with resilience. They were not simply surviving, they were building something stronger, each on their own path yet always within reach of each other. Half a year later, Grant showed up for Sunday dinner with someone new. Her name was Sabrina Torres, an environmental attorney he had met during a collaboration between firms. Nora felt old anxieties stir as she set the table. Memories of Madison's smile and whisper lingered like shadows. But Sabrina was different. Within minutes she asked Nora about her work and her hobbies, genuinely curious. When she noticed one of Nora's smaller paintings hanging in the hallway, she paused. "This is beautiful," she said, studying the brushstrokes. "Did you study art?" Nora shook her head, almost embarrassed. "Just something I picked back up." Sabrina's response was simple and sincere. "Well, you clearly have a gift." That evening, as they washed dishes side by side, Grant asked quietly, "So what do you think of her?" Nora smiled, a soft relief in her chest. "She seems real," she answered. "The kind of person who sees others." Looking back, Nora realized the hardest battles had never been about lawsuits or rumors. They were about belonging, dignity, and the courage to stand firm when others tried to write her out of her own story. 3 lessons remained. Real love does not isolate, it makes room. Perception may be loud, but truth endures if you give it light. And boundaries do not push people away, they protect the relationships worth keeping. Nora and Grant carried those truths forward into every new chapter. The bond Madison once tried to sever was now unshakable. If you found yourself in Nora's journey, take a moment to reflect. What boundary are you proud of holding this year? Share it in the comments. If this story spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe to The Art of Revenge. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us continue telling the truths that matter. The door to my new beach house opened with a quiet creak, and there they were, 2 figures I had not seen in 12 long years. My daughter Caroline and her husband Stephen stood on the porch with nervous smiles that barely masked the desperation in their eyes. Behind me stretched the panoramic ocean view, the wide blue horizon framed like a living painting through the glass walls of my living room. Inside, polished marble floors gleamed beneath soft sunlight. The Italian leather sofa, the carefully chosen artwork, the serenity of this home, it was all a world away from the tiny apartment where I had once spent my evenings alone. Caroline's voice trembled as she spoke. "Mom, we need to talk." Talk. That single word carried the weight of 12 silent years. 12 Christmases without a single invitation. 12 birthdays with no phone call. 12 years in which they erased me from their lives as if I had never existed. My gaze lingered on them, memorizing every detail. Caroline wore a faded dress that had clearly seen better days. Her shoes were cracked at the seams, telling stories of long walks and harder times. Her hands twisted nervously, betraying her fragile composure. Stephen, on the other hand, carried himself with forced confidence, adjusting the collar of a wrinkled shirt. His eyes darted quickly past me, scanning the room like an appraiser, measuring the worth of every object. For a long moment, I simply stood there in silence. The waves outside whispered against the shore, a steady rhythm reminding me that my life had found peace long before they decided to reappear. Then, slowly, I stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. "Come in," I said calmly. "After 12 years of silence, let us hear what you finally have to say." Long before this day, before the quiet knock at my door, there had been another life. A life where my daughter, Caroline, was the center of my world, where laughter filled our small kitchen, and where weekends meant phone calls and visits. But that life had ended the day she met Stephen Turner. At first he was all charm and politeness. He called me Mrs. Lockwood with a smile that never reached his eyes. He praised my holiday meals, pulled out chairs at the table, and spoke as if he were a man of good intentions. Yet behind that polished courtesy was something darker, something I would only understand much later. Slowly, he began to place invisible walls between Caroline and me. When she mentioned visiting me on the weekend, Stephen would suddenly remember a work emergency or insist they had other plans. If I called to hear her voice, it was often him who answered, his tone short, promising that Caroline would call me back. She rarely did. Invitations were misplaced. Messages went unanswered. My presence in their lives was quietly erased, not with loud words but with subtle silences. The first signs felt like accidents. I wasn't invited to Caroline's graduation from her MBA program. "Mom, we thought you had other plans," she said with a nervous laugh. When she had her first baby, I waited for an invitation to the baby shower, only to be told it was something very small, just a few college friends. My heart cracked, but I smiled, nodded, and said I understood. The excuses piled up like bricks until a wall stood between us that I could no longer cross. The sharpest pain came during holidays. Thanksgiving passed with Caroline's voice telling me, "It will just be the four of us this year." Christmas came and went with claims that the children were sick. Birthdays were suddenly too complicated with Stephen's work schedule. Every time she assured me, "Next time, Mom," but next time never came. I spent those years cooking for one, setting a single plate at the table, pretending not to notice the empty chairs. On my birthday, I bought myself a small cake from the corner bakery and lit a candle, whispering wishes into an empty room. My phone stayed silent. My apartment echoed with loneliness, and in the quietest hours when the world outside was asleep, I asked myself over and over, how did I lose my daughter? What did I do so wrong that she decided I no longer belonged in her life? When the silence from Caroline became unbearable, I realized I had two choices: drown in sorrow or find a way to survive. I chose survival. My savings were nearly gone, and the rent for my small apartment crept higher each year. So I turned to the one thing that had always brought me comfort: baking. I began selling pies, cakes, and cookies at the town's farmers market every Sunday. At first it felt humiliating to stand under the blazing sun, my hands rough from kneading dough, offering desserts to strangers. But gradually I discovered something unexpected. Those strangers valued me more than my own family had. They smiled when they tasted my pies, praised the flaky crusts, and returned week after week. Their gratitude reminded me that I still had worth. Every day became part of a routine. Mondays were for apple pies, Tuesdays for chocolate fudge cakes, Wednesdays for muffins that filled my tiny kitchen with sweet aromas. I woke up before dawn, packed heavy baskets with my creations, and carried them to the market with aching shoulders, but a determined spirit. By the time the sun set each Sunday, I had sold enough to cover bills and buy ingredients for the next week. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was there, at the market, that I met Helen Carter, a widow in her 70s who bought 3 pies every week, one for herself, 2 for her neighbors. She had children too, but like me, they rarely called. Over cups of coffee, we shared stories of abandonment, of children who moved on and never looked back. Helen's laughter carried a sadness I understood. Children think once they have families of their own, parents don't matter anymore, she often said, until they need something. Then suddenly they remember we exist. Her words stayed with me. Week after week, as I sold pies and returned to my modest apartment, I repeated them silently. She was right. Parents like us became invisible until convenience demanded otherwise. That thought stung, but it also strengthened me. If Caroline and Stephen had erased me, then I would write a new story for myself, one pie, one cake, one Sunday at a time. Life continued in this steady rhythm until one phone call shattered the pattern and rewrote my future. It was a lawyer from California. His voice was formal, measured, but the news he carried struck me like thunder. My Aunt Agnes Whitmore, the quiet, distant relative who had left for America decades ago, had passed away, and she had left everything to me. At first, I thought it was some sort of mistake. Aunt Agnes had been a name mentioned only in family whispers. A few Christmas cards, a photograph in faded sepia, and stories of her bold decision to leave for the West Coast were all I remembered. Yet here was a stranger telling me that she had not only lived well but had built a fortune. And she had chosen me, the niece she had quietly followed through letters and rumors, to inherit it. The inheritance was staggering. A home in Los Angeles that sold for over $1 million, bank accounts filled with savings, and investments worth even more. Altogether, more wealth than I had ever imagined touching. My knees trembled as I listened, gripping the phone like a lifeline. For so long I had counted coins to buy flour and sugar, and now I was being told I was a millionaire. But what touched me most was not the money, it was the letter Aunt Agnes left behind. In her shaky handwriting she explained that she had watched my struggles from afar, had seen the loneliness and the strength I carried. She wrote, "Marian, I want you to live your final years as the queen you always were, not the beggar they tried to make you." With that inheritance I bought the beach house of my dreams. Each morning I awoke to the sound of waves instead of the hum of traffic. I brewed coffee in a kitchen filled with sunlight. I walked the shoreline at dusk, letting the tide wash away years of sorrow. For the first time in decades I felt free. Free from loneliness, free from financial fear, free from the invisible chains my daughter's rejection had wrapped around me. 3 months after moving into my new home, when the sea breeze had finally become my closest companion, the past returned to my doorstep. It was a quiet afternoon when I heard the knock on the heavy oak door. I opened it and there they stood, Caroline and Stephen. Time had not been kind to them. Caroline's once bright eyes now carried shadows. Her hair, once carefully styled, hung limp against her face. She wore a dress that looked worn thin. It seemed tired from too many washings. Her shoes were cracked and peeling. I could see the tremor in her hands as she held her purse close, as if even that small possession might slip away. Stephen tried to carry himself with confidence, but it was brittle. His shirt was wrinkled, the collar frayed, and he shifted uncomfortably as though the ground itself were unsteady. His eyes darted quickly past me, roaming through the open doorway. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the furniture, the polished marble floor, the art on the walls. His gaze lingered on the panoramic view of the ocean as though he were calculating its price. "Mom," Caroline whispered, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." The words were simple, but they cut deep. For 12 years there had been no talk, no phone calls, no messages except the rare obligatory text. Now, suddenly they wanted to talk. I stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. They walked in cautiously, their eyes widening at every detail. The cream-colored leather sofa, the glass coffee table, the polished wood shelves lined with books, all of it seemed to overwhelm them. Caroline followed Stephen like a shadow, her head bowed. He, on the other hand, looked around with the greedy curiosity of a man surveying an opportunity. "Sit down," I said softly, pointing to the sofa that had cost more than they probably earned in a year. My voice remained calm, but my heart beat steadily with a mixture of anger and clarity. I knew why they were here. I had known from the moment I saw their faces on my porch. They had not come for love. They had not come for reconciliation. They had come because, at last, they needed something from me. The three of us sat in the living room, the sound of waves faint through the open windows. I folded my hands on my lap and waited. Stephen cleared his throat, trying to sound composed. "Marian," he began, "we know it's been a few years since we last spoke." 12 years, I interrupted, my voice firm. "Not a few. 12 years since you decided I didn't exist." The color drained from Caroline's face, her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no urge to comfort her. I had shed too many tears alone to be moved by hers now. "Mom, it wasn't meant to be like that," she whispered. "Things just got complicated." Complicated. I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. Complicated was missing your graduation because you thought I had other plans. Complicated was not being invited to your baby shower because it was just friends from college. Complicated was 12 Christmases where I cooked for one and blew out birthday candles by myself. Stephen shifted, his hands clasped together in mock sincerity. "Families sometimes need space to grow. It was nothing personal against you." The laugh that escaped me was sharp, almost startling. "Nothing personal. You aced me from your lives. You denied your children the love of a grandmother who would have adored them. You left me to wonder if I had failed as a mother. And now you come here after 12 years to tell me it was nothing personal." Caroline broke down, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with sobs. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have called. I should have fought harder. But Stephen said it was better for the marriage if we kept distance. He said mothers-in-law always caused problems." "And you believed him," I said flatly. "You believed him because it was easier than defending me. You chose silence over love." The room grew heavy with truth. Stephen shifted again, irritation flickering across his face, as if my words had pierced through his carefully crafted performance. I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady. "Do you know what it felt like, Caroline? To see families in the park, grandparents with their grandchildren, while I sat alone. To spend Christmas Eve with a store-bought cake because my daughter decided I wasn't worthy of an invitation. Do you know how many nights I stayed awake asking what I did wrong? Caroline sobbed harder, unable to answer. Stephen, finally losing his patience, muttered, "We can't change the past, Marion. We're here now. That should count for something." I looked at him directly. "You're here because your life is falling apart, not because you suddenly remembered you had a mother-in-law. You're here because you need something, not because you love me. And that, Stephen, counts for nothing." The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Caroline dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue while Stephen leaned forward, shifting tactics. His tone softened, but his eyes betrayed calculation. "Marion," he said slowly, "we know mistakes were made, but the children are innocent in all of this. They don't deserve to suffer for decisions made by adults. Don't you think they deserve to know their grandmother?" There it was, the card he had been saving, the grandchildren, the most powerful weapon in his arsenal. He spoke as if he were concerned for them, but I heard the manipulation in every word. It was not about love, it was about leverage. Caroline looked up, her face streaked with tears. "They ask about you, Mom. They see other kids with their grandparents and wonder why they don't have the same." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I almost wavered. Almost. But Helen's words from the farmer's market echoed in my mind. Children often come back to their parents not out of love, but out of convenience. I had seen it happen too many times. The timing of their visit spoke louder than their tears. "You speak of the children now," I said calmly, "but where were you when they were born? Where was I when they took their first steps? Where was I when they lost their first teeth, when they went to school, when they celebrated birthdays? You denied them a grandmother for 12 years, not by their choice but by yours." Caroline sobbed, her voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting my marriage. Stephen said it was for the best." I turned my gaze to him. Of course he did. Because he saw my love as interference. He saw my presence as a threat to his control. And you let him convince you. Stephen shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. For the first time he seemed aware that his mask was slipping. I leaned back, my voice steady. "Do not try to soften my heart with talk of innocent children. You decided they didn't need a grandmother until now, until you were desperate. Love that appears only in crisis is not love. It is convenience, and I will not let convenience dictate my worth." Stephen's composure finally cracked, his jaw tightened, and his voice rose sharper than before. "This is ridiculous, Marion. You're blowing everything out of proportion. Families fight, families drift apart, but now we're here, trying to fix it, and you just keep digging up the past." His words rang with impatience, not remorse. I recognized that tone. It was the same condescending tone I had heard years ago when he first began pulling Caroline away from me. Caroline flinched at his sharpness. "Stephen, please," she whispered, but he ignored her. I sat straighter in my chair, my voice calm, deliberate. "The past is not some pile of forgotten arguments, Stephen. The past is 12 years of silence, 12 years of rejection, 12 years of watching my daughter become a stranger. That is not something I can simply sweep aside because you are uncomfortable." Caroline's sobs filled the room, each one heavier than the last. She finally looked at me with red, swollen eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you. I should have called. I let him convince me you were the problem, when really all you ever wanted was to love me and the kids." Her confession should have softened me, but the timing poisoned it. She had 12 years to recognize that truth, and she waited until her life was falling apart to say it. "You're right," I said quietly. "You let him convince you, and now you want me to believe this sudden realization is about love, not about money. Tell me, Caroline, why now? Why after all these years?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her silence answered better than anything she could have said. Stephen's face darkened with frustration. He stood abruptly, his voice rising. "Enough with this guilt trip, Marion. We didn't come here to be humiliated. We came because we need help. If you truly cared about family, you'd stop punishing us and do the right thing." I rose slowly, meeting his glare without flinching. "The right thing, Stephen, is to tell the truth. You didn't come here for love, you came here for money, and that is where this conversation ends." For the first time that afternoon I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He realized he had lost control. The tension in the room lingered like a storm that had finally broken. Caroline sat slumped on the sofa, her face buried in her hands. Stephen stood rigid, his jaw tight, clearly calculating his next move but too shaken to speak. I walked toward the wide glass doors that opened to the terrace. Beyond them, the late afternoon sun painted the sky in hues of gold and rose. The waves rolled in steady rhythm, each one reminding me of the peace I had built without them. "You should go," I said quietly, not turning to face them. "This house is no longer a place for manipulation. I will not open my door to desperation disguised as love." Neither of them moved at first. Then Stephen let out a frustrated breath and stormed toward the door. Caroline followed slowly, her steps uncertain, her shoulders trembling under the weight of regret. She paused at the threshold, as if she wanted to speak, but the words never came. Then she slipped outside and the door closed behind her. Silence filled the house, a silence that felt like freedom rather than abandonment. I poured myself a glass of chilled white wine and stepped onto the terrace. The salty breeze brushed against my face, and the horizon stretched endlessly before me. For the first time in years, I felt light. Later I called Helen. Her voice carried the warmth of someone who understood. "How did it go?" she asked. "Exactly as we thought," I replied. "They came for money, not for love, and I finally feel free." Weeks turned into months, and the quiet rhythm of my life returned. The farmers' market ladies still stopped by on Sundays for coffee and pie, and Helen and I continued our Wednesday gatherings where laughter replaced sorrow. My days were simple but full, and the ocean outside my window reminded me daily that peace is priceless. Then one evening a message lit up my phone. It was from Caroline. Her words were short, without excuses, without demands. "Mom, I'm in therapy. I'm learning about boundaries and toxic relationships. I know I don't deserve a second chance yet, but I hope one day I can be the daughter you deserve. I love you." I read it twice before saving it. For the first time, her words carried no manipulation. But I did not reply. Some wounds need time, and some bridges cannot be rebuilt with a single message. I set the phone down and stepped outside to watch the sunset. The waves whispered against the shore, steady and sure. For the first time in years, I felt not just free, but whole. Family should mean love, respect, and presence, not convenience. That is the lesson I will carry with me, and the one I leave with you.